What is plate tectonics and why does it affect millions of people every year? Well, in part one, we looked at Wegener's continental drift and we looked at Hess's seafloor spreading and how these two hypotheses came together to form one of the most all-encompassing theories in science, the theory of plate tectonics. Now, in this part, we're going to sort of look at how plate tectonics affects your very life and how this theory has the power to explain all kinds of geological processes such as earthquakes, volcanoes, mountain building, tsunamis, among many others. So let's go back to Hess's seafloor spreading first. Now, as the seafloor is pulled apart, red hot rock from the asthenosphere undergoes something called decompression melting and turns into magma, which then pushes itself into the newly formed crack in the lower part of the lithosphere just below the seafloor. Because the magma is in contact with water, it quickly cools and hardens. But the conveyor belt movement of the lithosphere only occurs when the red hot rock in the asthenosphere sort of splits into two due to the forces of convection, and it literally pushes the lithosphere, including the seafloor, along for the ride. Since the lithosphere on either side of this freshly hardened wedge continues to move away from that central opening, this process repeats itself over and over again, eventually creating a brand new seafloor. The boundary where this process occurs is called a divergent plate boundary. That's easy to remember because the plates diverge away from each other. Now, I know what you're thinking. If new seafloor is being created here, then what happens to the old seafloor farther down the conveyor belt? And that's a great question. Well, if the plate is capped by seafloor, such as here, and collides with a plate capped by a continent like this, then the seafloor capped plate will get subducted down into the mantle under the continental capped plate. This occurs because the seafloor capped plate is denser than the continental capped plate, allowing the continental capped plate to sort of float over the other. The boundary where this occurs is called a convergent plate boundary, which is easy to remember again because the plates converge. As it turns out, the same amount of seafloor created at the divergent plate boundary also disappears into the mantle at the convergent plate boundary. If that were not so, then the Earth would sort of grow in size. When a seafloor capped plate collides with another seafloor capped plate, this is called ocean-to-ocean convergence. When this occurs, the denser plate is the one that gets subducted down into the mantle. Now, sometimes continental capped plates collide with other continental capped plates. This is called continent-to-continent convergence. When this occurs, the continental material on both plates gets pushed and sort of welded together. These kinds of plate boundaries give rise to very high mountainous regions such as the Himalayas, which are thought to have formed as a result of India colliding with Asia. A transform plate boundary is a fault zone where two plates horizontally slide past each other. In the western United States, the relative motion between the movement of the Pacific plate and the North American plate is responsible for the infamous San Andreas fault. At its current rate of movement, scientists predict that Los Angeles and San Francisco will be neighbors in about 16 million years or so. So watch this space. Of course, many other geologic processes can be tied to the action of moving tectonic plates. I've already discussed the formation of the Himalayas that occurred when India slammed into Asia. But plate tectonics also explains other geologic processes such as earthquakes, volcanoes, and tsunamis. The formation of the Cascade Ranges in western North America, for example, result from the subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate. As the plate moves down into the mantle, ocean sediments and associated minerals hydrated with water get taken along for the ride. As the pressure and the heat increase, the water becomes superheated and actually aids in lowering the melting temperature of the subducted sediments, the old seafloor, and parts of the mantle. This newly generated magma, since it is lighter than the material around it, quickly rises through the Earth's lithosphere and erupts at the Earth's surface as a chain of volcanoes. All of the volcanoes found around the edges of the Pacific Plate, also called the Pacific Rim, were formed in much the same way as those of the Cascades. But wait, there's more. You see, not only can plate tectonics explain volcanoes, it can explain earthquakes and tsunamis as well. In 2011, the magnitude 9 Tohoku earthquake in Japan was caused by shallow water plate movements when the margin of the overlying Okhotsk plate was literally pushed in by the subducting Pacific plate. This squeezing in of the rock caused a buildup of potential elastic energy, similar to what happens when we push in a spring. Eventually, the strain on the rock was too much and the rock lurched forward by as much as 20 meters or 60 feet, producing a powerful earthquake that rocked Japan. The tsunami that followed was also produced by these shifting plates. As the Tohoku plate lurched forward, it caused a rapid vertical displacement in sea level that generated a 40-meter or 130-foot high tsunami. Okay, so that's it for this two-part series on plate tectonics. Let's do some review now to solidify what we've learned. First of all, we learned that plate tectonics is really the merging of two theories. Can you remember what they are and who developed them? If you said continental drift and seafloor spreading, whoa, you'd be correct. Good job. Of course, Alfred Wegener is the one who gets the credit for continental drift, but let's not forget about Antonio Snyder-Pellegrini. And of course, William Hess is the one person who developed seafloor spreading. Now, remember that this part of the crust is called the lithosphere, and this part is called the asthenosphere. Think of the lithosphere as hard and brittle, and the asthenosphere as hot and plastic-like. And remember, the lithosphere can be capped by either seafloor or continental crust. Now, do you remember what kind of plate boundary this is? And what about this one? And this one? Now, if you said a convergent, a divergent, and a transform boundary in that order, you'd be correct. Good job again. Now, can you give me 4 examples of large-scale processes that result from subducting plates? Well, 1 would be mountain building, 2 would be volcanoes, 3 would be earthquakes, and 4 would be tsunamis. Now, there are others, but they're the 4 main ones that we discussed in this 2-part series. Okay, it's time now for our creation fact of the week. Did you know that the first person to come up with continental drift was a creationist? No, I'm not talking about Alfred Wegener. More than 60 years before Wegener proposed his idea, French young Earth creationist Antonio Snyder-Pellegrini proposed the same idea using much of the same evidence, including the similarity of fossils on different continents. These sketches come from Snyder-Pellegrini's book, which he published in 1858. Notice the similarity of Snyder-Pellegrini's maps to those of Wegener's. Of course, Snyder-Pellegrini did not believe the separation of Pangaea occurred slowly over millions of years. In his theory, better called continental sprint, Snyder-Pellegrini believed Pangaea broke apart as a result of Noah's flood. Recently, creationists have revisited Snyder-Pellegrini's idea by proposing what they call catastrophic plate tectonics, or CPT. Like Snyder-Pellegrini, many modern young Earth creationists propose that the breaking apart of Pangaea occurred catastrophically, probably during the flood of Noah, or maybe just before or just after. This, of course, may be difficult for many people to accept. After all, the world's tectonic plates today move very, very slowly, literally at the rate that your fingernails grow. So is there any evidence at all that can help us break free from the dictating power of personal experience? And the answer is yes, there is some evidence that supports the notion of rapidly moving tectonic plates. In the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia, a 37-mile long, 25-foot wide section of the Earth opened up literally overnight. Over the next few months, hundreds of other fissures appeared throughout the area, some of which were filling up with fresh basaltic magma sourced from deep within the asthenosphere. One such gash was 1,500 feet long and 200 feet wide. Now, no, we are not talking about sort of sprinting plates here, but neither does this kind of tectonic activity accord with plates that supposedly move at just a few centimeters a year. So this is really intriguing. Secondly, a strong piece of evidence supporting CPT is the existence of still cold slabs of subducted lithosphere in the mantle. By cold, I mean that there is a 3,000 degree difference centigrade in temperature between these old oceanic slabs and the mantle that surrounds the slabs. But these slabs are thought to have been down there for 100 million years. You would think that at the very least the temperatures between the subducted slabs of ocean floor and the mantle would have come to equilibrium by now. Thirdly, rapidly moving and subducting plates has been scientifically modeled. And yes, normal physics does allow for the possibility. See this paper by John Baumgartner for more details. Of course, the most important piece of evidence supporting CPT are the scriptures themselves. In Genesis 7:11, the Bible says that on that day, all the fountains of the great deep burst forth. Now, what exactly fountains are is up for grabs, but that it involves some deep sea crustal movement on a global scale seems pretty straightforward. Well, that's it from me, Dr. C here with Creation Geology for Beginners. If you liked this video, please go ahead, smack that like button and hit the subscribing button while you're there. For more resources, you can go to my website, www.creationunfolding.com, and you can also buy my book. Thank you and goodbye.